I don't have Ralph to give me the signal, so. How's Noah?
Saying, how about yourself? You ready for Turkey Day?
He was a modernization.
No.
What I'm not ready for is what comes after him.
He's still on there. 5
He's
weeks.
2 years older than I am.
Well, it's already been going on a couple of weeks already.
Oh, traffic's already bad.
When I was
Turkey Creek
in
traffic.
New York City, we had a couple of old food stores.
And I don't shop much on the internet, but we do more over Christmas. Kids will send us stuff and links and
September
everything.
1994, I remember well.
Not good
It
at,
used to be 19.
but
Yeah, I try it on the same way. I try to support our local retailers as much as I can. Sometimes
getting
it's
there. I mean,
the
we have
convenience
the
factor
Regis development
weighs in.
yeah.
that's going in.
Okay, I want to call.
House is turned into lofts.
I want to call the November 16th, 2017 meeting of the Farragut Municipal Planning Commission to order. We'll start out with citizens forum. If anybody has any questions or comments that's not part of the agenda, you can ask those questions or make those comments now. Anybody on the Planning Commission have any questions or comments? Mark, you have any announcements or anything?
No, we had a pretty good presentation earlier this week downtown. Jeff Randolph spoke about mixed-use development. He's a developer in Greenville, South Carolina. I think he had a night session that same night on the 14th. I don't know if any of y'all were able to make that. I know Roseanne was at the 14th luncheon. But he had a lot of good ideas, a lot of the stuff that we'll be talking about later with the subdivision regulations. So it was a good presentation.
If nothing else, we'll move on to approval of the agenda. Any changes to that?
No changes.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
No one opposed. Okay. Approval of the minutes for the October 19th, 2017 meeting. Any changes with that?
Not that I have.
Well, technically, shouldn't we be approving them? Oh, right. No, I'm thinking I've got my agenda in minutes. We're right on target. I'm ahead of myself.
Never mind.
Never mind.
I move for approval of the minutes.
Second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, discussion and public hearing on a re-subdivision plat involving parcels 78.03, 79, 80, and 81, and a part of parcels 95, 95.01, 96, 96.01, and 97, as shown on tax map 151, zone PCD and R-1, 26.4 acres, beginning point land surveying, LLC applicant.
This plat is basically, the purpose of this is to combine parcels and portions of parcels that will become that planned commercial development that was recently rezoned a few months ago at the west intersection of South Watt Road and Kingston Pike. A small part of this is in Loudoun County, very small, so it would actually have to be approved through Loudoun County as well. Another comment that we had the recommendations at your places, all those I've talked with the surveyor are doable. The one thing that if they're not going to construct pedestrian facilities along Kingston Pike, in this case, there's a section of Kingston Pike where there is not an existing sidewalk, and the subdivision regulations require sidewalks or pedestrian facilities to be constructed along the frontages of all collector and arterial streets as part of the subdivision process. So if someone is wanting to request a variance from that requirement, you all would have to take separate action on that at this time. The applicant has indicated to me that they will be constructing that sidewalk section as part of the site development plan for that planned commercial development. It's this section. I think it's more or less that section there, just to the east of the Y12 Credit Union and west of the Little Joe's Pizza. Everything, all the other frontages of this development have existing pedestrian facilities, even on Old Stage Road. So you will need to take separate action on that. As I understand it, they are requesting a variance from the subdivision regulations for that requirement at this time, with the understanding that that will be constructed as part of the site development.
Anybody have
So
any
I get
questions
my
or comments
bearings,
from-
is that lot that's there at the corner of Kingston Pike and South Watt Road, is that where
Little
Pilot is?
Joe's, Little Joe's.
Pizza.
It's on the south side of Kingston Pike. That's
Oh,
Little
okay.
Joe's Pizza.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments before we? Applicant?
Could I ask, my name's Mark Balick, GBS Engineering, 1313 Calmia Road. I have already submitted the plans for site development permit for next month for that parcel, and the sidewalk is included. If that will make your variance a little bit easier to swallow.
So first of all, you have to take action on the variance request, and then we'll take action on the plat itself.
And it's not really unusual for us to grant a variance at this stage and then pick it up on the site development stage.
We did that with the Dollar General plat, if you remember, and with, I think with O'Reilly's, because they both did their facilities when they constructed the site, you know, so that it's not uncommon.
The applicant's comfortable with the outbuilding that's in a new property line, removing that outbuilding?
I think that's one of the clarifications, but yeah, on lot 4 and 5.
Yeah. Looks like, it looks pretty little, probably, I guess probably a little barn or something.
Daniel Humphreys, Beginning Point Land Surveying,
It's this area down here.
234 Ladridge Road, Kingston. Yeah, what it is, what's on that line is a portable carport.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And that diagonal line you see kind of going through the middle of that blue circle is the county line. So you can see that little triangle area is what's actually part of Loudoun County.
Just that one little piece right there.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments? And you all are okay with the subject twos? Can you, please, somebody say that in the microphone for me?
Yes, ma'am, we're comfortable with the subject twos.
I'm going to make a stab at crafting a motion to grant a variance that requires the installation of a sidewalk at the plat. Did that make sense?
At the time of construction?
Site
Well,
development.
Variance
site
due to the
development
fact that
plan.
it'll be constructed during site plan development, during
plan
site
development.
development.
Right.
Is that what?
In lieu of installing the sidewalk at the plat phase, the sidewalk will be installed at the site development phase.
Yep.
Is that
Second.
a little more clear?
Yeah.
Good to me, yeah.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Oppose?
And then the plat itself.
So,
Yep.
have a motion?
Move for approval with the stipulations.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Oppose? Thank you. Now we move on to item number 5, discussion and public hearing on a preliminary plat for the Old Stage Farm subdivision, parcel 105.02, tax map 151, zoned R-2, 5.64 acres, 9 lots, urban engineering applicant.
Okay, this is a piece of property, a small subdivision off Old Stage Road. It's actually sandwiched between part of phases 1 and 4 of Fort West. There's house lots all around this property. As you might remember, there was a concept plan that came before you all back in March with a different developer. Had a pretty similar layout to this. The property is zoned R2 currently. There's a different developer involved with this one. They are proposing to construct a sidewalk on the east side of the street, and it would tie into a walking trail that would be constructed to the southeast corner of the property, which actually would end up where there's a tiny corner of Fort West Homeowners Association property that comes to that point. So that's why that trail terminates at that location, so that if in the future, that subdivision wanted to connect, to get Fort West connected into this development, that facility would be there. As part of this plat, they're also requesting a variance from the lane width requirements. As you can see, this is a short street. The minimum lane width on a local street, standard minimum lane width is 13 feet for a 26-foot wide total street. They're requesting two 11-foot lanes for a total of 22 feet, so you'll need to take a separate action on that request. The fire marshal did have a concern about the reduced width, but he indicated that as an option, that if they provided mountable curbing instead of extruded curbing, I think he could live with that. So they are showing mountable curbing on this design. Something else that just when we went out and walked this property, as you all know, it's Bob Watt's former house site. It's got an existing house on it that would be removed as part of this development. But the property has a couple of really specimen trees, really, that are on lot 2, and there's also a sinkhole on the property. And let me see if I can point this out real quick. The drip line of that oak tree on lot 2. There's another really nice cedar tree there. They are saving a couple of very nice trees back here on this open space lot. There's 2 open space lots, 7 house lots, and then this is the sinkhole area here with the building set back roughly this outer line. So it's got a lot of, physical opportunities, I would say. And in hindsight, I would propose that, and of course it's up to the developer and timing, but it's almost a better candidate to me for an open space overlay. We didn't really think about that initially because it's such a small site, but after walking the land and then some of the grading issues that at least the last version that we reviewed it had some grading that had part of the detention basin in one of the house lots, lot 5. I think the flexibility in the OSR district, because it doesn't have the lot width frontage requirements and lot size limitations and those kinds of things, may give them enough flexibility to work better with those opportunities that the site has. But that again is up to the developer. I just pointed out for discussion. And let me go to the next page here real quick. Anybody have any questions? I'll go to the next sheet. This shows the grading, and this maybe has been modified, but it does have a little bit of the, and frankly, I missed this on initial review and should have caught it. Our practice in recent years has been trying to get stormwater detention facilities off of house lots because we've had issues with homeowners not really knowing what they can and cannot do in relation to those areas. We've had some that have tried to fill them in and, just all kinds of stuff. And it's better to try to get those on open space lots that are maintained by the homeowners associations. So that's another thing that we, discovered during the review. So that's just kind of an overview of the development. It's a nice piece of property. It's got a lot of good features. We will need a separate action on the street lane widths. and then an action on the plat itself. And the remaining comments were at your places in terms of the plat.
What does the developer have to say
Yeah.
about the overlay possibility?
Have y'all had a chance to discuss that or review it? See if it,
Chris Sharp, Urban Engineering, 11852 Kingston Pike. We have, I mean, we'll take the time to explore, an OSR overlay. It'll just be a matter of whether or not, the house plans basically make sense for my client. And they may or may not. I just haven't evaluated that. As far as the detention, the detention easement being on the private lot, I feel confident that we can revise things to make, to eliminate that concern.
I mean, that lot's a pretty big lot, so you should be able to tighten it up, because that's just really where your driveway is going to be anyway.
Right.
Tighten it up right there, and has still plenty of footprint, buildable footprint for your house.
And I miss that too on my end, to be honest.
I mean, it's not prohibited, but it's not, we found it not to be a good idea to have those on part of a house lot, because it just, people are ignorant about what that is and what their responsibilities are, frankly. And so it's better to try not to do that.
What about the trees? Have you,
Our focus initially was, there are two trees down near around the southern end of the property where the creek is the property line. My initial
Saving
focus
those.
was, saving those trees, and I think that, our grading efforts will be out of the drip lines of those trees. And they're large. I don't remember the diameters, but I can't hug them. Ideally, we knew that was going to be a common area where stormwater was, and it'd be just kind of a nice opportunity to create, on about a park setting, but some kind of common area that could be an amenity for the development. So that was what my primary focus is on. The one, closer to the road on Lot 2 will be, it will be more problematic because, we have topographic constraints. Not saying we won't try, but, I don't know until I take a further look
that's
at it.
You talking about the cedar tree?
No, ma'am.
the one next to it, the big oak.
Big oak
There's a
tree?
large oak tree.
It's a really amazing tree. I was surprised. I mean, when I went out there, it's massive.
Yeah.
But there's quite a bit of
Yeah,
elevation
no.
change between where we're proposing the road and that eastern property line. So I don't, I can't make any promises, but I promise we will look at it.
Well, the reality is just when you want to build a house there, that tree's got to come down.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to be in the drip line of the tree. It
Just
just
too
kind of is
big.
what it is. I mean, I remember the gigantic tree that was at the entrance of Wentworth for years, right there on the first lot on the left. And it was a magnificent tree, but it's somebody's lot, and
Yeah.
it's it's just when you're dealing with some constraints like you guys are dealing with the drainage and the sinkhole, and you got to make the numbers work. It's hard to save everything. I mean, we wish you could save that tree, but we also know that's a valuable lot right there.
That's where the OSR could help them, because it's a 10-foot closer front setback potentially. It's just something, again, and I know Chris is looking at that, but that's one of the, it has a less front setback than the R2 does.
Yeah, you look at the canopy of that tree, though, it's still
It's
be
pretty
really
big,
challenging
yeah. It will
to
be.
stay out of that. And ideally on trees like that, you got to stay out of the drip line to truly try to save them. And that's
It'll be a
That's
challenge,
a
yeah.
gigantic tree. It is what it is.
We will evaluate it.
Okay.
Takes up a lot of that lot, doesn't it?
It does. That tells you how big the tree is.
Yeah, you should go look at that one. That's probably one of the biggest in the town, I'd say.
Been there a while.
Yeah, we're Ray Keeney with Ray Keeney Construction, 12422 Union Road. We'll try to design a house plan around it. We're working on house plans now, and that's why we didn't want to go really. We'll look at the OSR, but we've really already got house plans kind of designed for it that work really well on those lot sizes. So, but we'll look at we'll look at it and have Chris draw something up and see.
Yeah, because that's not a cheap tree to remove, whether you're doing it
Yeah.
pre-construction or post-construction.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
still going to be an expensive tree to take down.
Yeah, it'd be,
No, but it's a great, I mean, it's a great tree, and it'd be great to save it. I'm sure it'd be a selling
if
feature.
you got an arborist involved to maybe give you some during construction,
Give you some
because a
advice.
lot of times you can go to almost within halfway into the drip line if you have a plan by an arborist to help, and he may look at it and say it's got some serious health problems that I don't see.
Well, he's right, Mark. Sometimes those arborists can say, hey, if you do some root pruning,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and there's certain techniques that they can prune those roots, that you can get in there. Now, if you're in there trying to, put a big basement in, it just is what it is. I mean, you're moving a lot of red dirt. But we'll kind of leave that up to you. Obviously, we'd like to recommend if you any way you can save a big tree like that you can. I think you've done a good job trying to work around that. A lot of folks have looked at this with that sinkhole and trying to figure out how to make it a nice little neighborhood. And I think you guys have done a good job. And I quite frankly, I kind of like your tightened roads, a little bit smaller roads, and that's kind of what we've talked about as a planning commission. Some of these other parcels, we're going to see more and more of these smaller, let's say 3 to 7 acre parcels that we're going to see. It's not all about the big 100-acre parcels anymore. And so we're going to deal with this more often. And so we think personally, I think you've done a really good job trying to design around some of the features that are there and utilize the property and have something without necessarily a whole lot of density. Even though the OSR, you could probably increase your density quite a bit with smaller lots. But, if that's not your intention, we understand that. We do appreciate you evaluating the pros and cons of it.
Okay with all the subject twos here?
How do we want to handle this? Look at the OSR. Is that,
Well, that was really just a suggestion. They could come back, and you may actually get another lot in there with the OSR. It's not out of the question. But if he's already designed houses that'll fit, it may not be worth.
question to you all, do you want us to defer it to the next meetings, having a chance to look at it, or do you want us to go ahead and proceed tonight?
I'd rather just go ahead and proceed, to be honest with you. Yeah.
I mean, he's
If you
complete.
take a look at it.
I mean, I
come
think the
back.
street is
yeah,
going to be what
maybe
it
with
is.
the option of having Chris, draw it up and see real quick what it would be.
So you can make a decision. Yeah.
Well, the reality is you're already compatible with the zoning.
Yep.
So you've
Yeah.
designed with maybe the exception of the road width, you've designed within the constraints of the zoning. So it'd be really tough for us to just say no, you can't
Right.
can't approve this tonight. But again, we'd like for you guys to spend some serious time looking at it. It would reduce your lot size and maybe increase your density. You might be able to get a couple of extra lots in there. Again, you'd have more open space, but you've got quite a bit of open space already. But
We just want to make sure you have the option to
right, we'll
look
leave
at
the
that
option up to you.
suggestion.
Okay.
Any other, and you are okay with the subject two here?
I have one more question. I'm curious as to why you selected Lot 4 for open space.
Probably for the detention, I assume.
Yes,
Option
that's
on the
correct.
two
The
large
stormwater detention pond is on Lot 4.
Isn't that just generally the low part of your property?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Water wants to go downhill, so.
All right, thank you.
Yes,
See how
ma'am.
most of that pond's there. The 2 trees are
Any
right
more
there.
questions or comments?
Requesting the variance for the street width because the street
Yeah, that's
cannot
on
be
this.
connected. It can't be extended, so your traffic counts are not going to change on it because you already have a build-out condition around it, and it's short.
I see that.
You're only
Thank you.
looking at at most 70 to 80 daily trips on that street section, and so that's why they're requesting the more narrow lane width because of the context of the setting, which I personally support their request for the variance for those reasons. I think it makes sense to
And
me.
you and the fire marshal are satisfied with the?
Now that they has a mountable
Mountable
curb
curb.
that where they can actually get over if they need to get around. Yeah.
Any more questions or comments? Do we start with the variance?
On the variance.
Anybody in
Yeah.
the audience have anything they wanted to add or questions about this particular agenda item? Then I'll take a stab at this variance. Maybe I'll do better than I did on the last one. How about a motion to approve the variance to permit 11-foot lane widths rather than 13-foot lane widths?
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose?
Was you need to have a reason. Was it-
Reason being is the short distance of the road and the, traffic count and the inability to connect that road to another road in the future because of the because of the context. This might be a little
Okay.
less wordy.
All right. I got it.
Okay, have a motion on the preliminary plat.
I make a motion that we accept the preliminary plat as presented, with the understanding that you will look at the possibility of the OSR
And the subject is.
and come back if it's feasible.
And the subject, acceptance of the subject
Yeah,
to.
subject to which you agreed to, correct?
And noting the mountable curb as shown on the drawing.
Yeah, it is on his revision.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Thank you. Okay, item number 6, discussion and public hearing on a request for a right-in, right-out access onto Kingston Pike associated with the new office building at 12640 Kingston Pike, Zone C-1.68 acres. GBS Engineering, Mark Balick, applicant.
This item relates to our driveways and other access ways ordinance in the municipal code. As you all know, access onto non-local streets, streets that are collector and arterial, have to be approved by the Planning Commission and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. And the objective of that ordinance, really one of the objectives, is to have better control over access points on heavily traveled streets for safety reasons and other reasons, functioning. This particular site, it was the site of a former Weigel's convenience store. It's at the east intersection of Way Station Trail and Kingston Pike. The lot is substandard in size. It's less than an acre. It has about 160 feet of frontage on Kingston Pike and about 170 on Way Station Trail. The site plan will be the next item on the agenda, and it's shown on the screen there. They're proposing a small office building on this property and utilizing the relaxed front yard setbacks that we have now in the C1 that we provided for a few months ago with some text amendments. As part of this, they're also requesting a right-in, right-out access onto Kingston Pike. Since Kingston Pike is classified as an arterial street, in accordance with the driveways and other access ways ordinance, driveways from intersections like Way Station Trail or driveways to the next driveway on arterial streets are required to be at least 400 feet apart. This particular access is about 125 feet from Way Station Trail, so therefore they would be requesting a variance of 275 feet from the 400-foot requirement. The staff, including a town engineer, has reviewed this, and we cannot support this particular request for a number of reasons, and I see these daily where I live. The first one, it's so close to Way Station Trail that it creates a conflict with somebody that's trying to turn out of Way Station Trail there, and you got an eastbound traveler on Kingston Pike with their signal on. It's so close to Way Station Trail that you don't know for sure if they're turning into Way Station Trail or they continue on and turn into the property. So it creates a real conflict point, kind of like what you have at Shiloh and Glen Abbey Boulevard on Kingston Pike. It's very unsafe. It's just too close is a problem. They also have a full access onto Way Station Trail. It's no different than the bank office building on the west side. It's the exact same. That bank doesn't have direct Kingston Pike access either. So this is, if you provide them with access, you're actually not providing an equitable application of the ordinance in relation to the four-story bank building. Because its only access is to Way Station Trail or the access point that is joint for Renaissance to Kingston Pike. And then thirdly, just the degree of variance that they're requesting, I think, if approved, would establish a bad precedent. It's just too severe of an amount of variance, and it could really create some issues with what might happen on the north side of Kingston Pike when the Swan property is developed. As you know, when that property is developed and potentially tied in with Union Road, it's very likely that there'll be a signal at Way Station Trail, and having an access point that close to a signalized condition is, again, an unsafe and a very bad idea from a transportation perspective. So for those reasons, the staff would not support the right-in, right-out, and we would ask that you apply the same standard that has been applied to the four-story office building to the west.
I certainly agree with your rationale, Mark.
Besides the fact that I have gone in and out of the Way Station Trail, and I find that a little difficult sometimes to get in and out, especially if you're turning from the north side of Kingston Pike into Way Station Trail. That's just a difficult place there, and I'm also very concerned about the precedent that we would be setting if we were to grant this.
I strongly disagree with this, and I would also add to all the things that's been mentioned by the staff as well as the other members, the fact that it's also right at the start of the curve to the east on Kingston Pike, and that proximity to that curve right there, there will, I've seen instances. It doesn't happen every time, but there will be people that will try to turn left into that development. Going westbound traffic. And so I would just add that to the long list of other reasons not to do this.
Any more questions or comments?
Has the applicant considered maybe just doing just a right out instead of a right in? And then that would negate the issue with somebody turning their blinker on and the unsure nature of whether they're going to turn on Way Station Trail or turn into this parking lot. But that might, it seems like if I'm there and I want to turn left, I'm real comfortable going over to Way Station Trail. Or if I'm going to be coming eastbound on Kingston Pike and I want to turn right, I'd be comfortable going into Way Station Trail. And then if I want to go east from this building, then just having just a right out instead of a right in and a right out.
I appreciate your thinking, Noah, but I still believe, in light of Mark's comments about the future development and whatnot and the light being there, I just think it's still too congested possibility.
But you're restricting life safety.
I think it's very compelling, the fact that we have a major entrance on Way Station to this piece of property. I see no compelling need for another egress or
How many
exit
parking
either one.
places will you have there?
16,
16?
yes.
We have a much bigger development just across the street on Way Station.
Yeah,
with this
I think
with
the
an entrance on
precedent
there.
Which
setting,
never could have
is-
an access to Kingston Pike because of the plating requirements of Renaissance.
It's immaterial. You
Oh,
don't
yes,
need
it is
for-
not.
you
No, it
need
is not,
for
because we
this
never
piece
had
of
the
property.
opportunity to have even apply for it. Because I did the 12700 building. It was restricted by plat as part of the Renaissance development that there would be no access between the two connections and Way Station Trail. We would have loved to have a right in, right out in between. But it was restricted by plat.
What,
Well, I understand, but it's not the same situation here. We only have
Smaller-
100.
Much smaller building with not near the need of the parking space.
I understand, and we would
You
not
have
be
overwhelming
opposed to a right out.
access to it off Way Station. There's no reason to approve that other entrance exit.
well, let me ask you this. What about, how would your deliveries, or let's just take it a step further, a fire truck? Is a fire?
Think about an
Will a
ambulance.
fire truck, I mean, will Dan Johnson be able to get a fire truck if you don't have any, if, like, for instance, the right out. The right in gives me some heartburn because I can understand the conflict of trying to determine is that person intending to pull in here, or are they intending to pull into Way Station Trail and the proximity to Way Station Trail. But it seems like, UPS trucks, they're big, they're longer than 20 feet, and typically they like to park and then move on to the next location. And you're not going to, they don't want to park out on Way Station Trail. I mean, you do have some sidewalks out there. I guess they could park out there and then make a delivery into the building. But it seems like if you had some other way of egress that was safe and not precedent setting, that it seems like that would, the ingress definitely gives me some concern, but having egress a right out, as long as your island was redesigned in such a manner that it needs to be much sharper than it is shown on this plan.
Exactly.
It seems like that would give you an opportunity to at least go eastbound. And Mark, is there any life or safety or traffic conflicts with a right out?
I will say, I go by the Weigels at the corner of Smith Road numerous times a day, and there is not a week that I don't see at least 2 or 3 people turning into their right in, right out. And it's I remember our discussion at the time it was to be built, that it was to prohibit that, and people still do it.
Well,
I talked with Daryl about this, the town engineer. He didn't like the ride out either because it's just again, it's so close. It's a conflict with what will happen on the north side because people might turn out right, but then they'll turn immediately left to get in, to go. Maybe they're trying to not avoid some stacking on Way Station or something. He just had a concern about, having any kind of access there just because of its proximity to Way Station and what might happen when that's signalized on the north side.
So what he's concerned about is when people break the law, not following the rules.
and people unfortunately are going to do it. I see people turn, believe it or not. I about got hit by a guy turning out of Brookline onto Kingston Pike. That right in there, but right by the China Pearl.
Somebody
Some guy
was
was
trying to
coming
exit there?
out that.
Wow.
So I mean, you can't design that.
You can't fix stupid.
out. But
Just
the access
envision
point
them coming
itself
out right,
is
going east, and
is a
getting
problem.
immediate, trying to get over in the left lane and make a U-turn to go back west.
yeah.
That's what I envision.
In that curve.
So you're saying Daryl's not comfortable with any kind of the design
No.
that even allows an egress there. It just seems like it would help, like fire truck or an ambulance,
Yeah,
or
I understand that.
or even
and I asked
in
him that 'cause
deliveries.
I didn't really know either, but he wasn't, just because of its proximity there and the future condition of that intersection.
Well, plus, as Rita's already pointed out, the precedent setting.
That's all of these others are issues for me, but the precedent setting, that's a substantial amount there that would be a variance for, and I don't think we want to put ourselves in that position in the future. Any other questions or comments? Anybody in the audience? We're down basically to the press now, almost. Do I have a motion?
Yeah, I move for denial of the request for the variance and the right-in, right-out access.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Oppose?
This will be going to the board though, so they also have to take action on this.
Will it be
so.
at the next meeting?
It probably will be at the December meeting, yeah. They have
Sure,
one
come
meeting
down
in
and make some
December.
comments.
That's fine.
So, yeah.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 6, discussion and public hearing, item number 7, discussion and public hearing on a site plan for a new office building at 12640 Kingston Pike, Zone C-1.68 acres, GBS Engineering, Mark Balick, applicant.
Let's see here. Well, obviously, this is related to the previous item. The applicant is completely redeveloping the Weigels, the old Weigels site there at Way Station in Kingston Pike with this 3,000 square foot office building. As I mentioned earlier, the lot is substandard. They are using the relaxed front yard setbacks that we have now, where the parking is no closer to the building than the street, so that they can fit everything in there. So I think without those changes to our C1 district a few months ago, they probably wouldn't have been able to develop this, at least not without some variances. This item was incomplete last month, so we recommended postponement. They have addressed most of the substantial comments. We had the remaining comments there at your places. Probably there's a couple things that we might want to discuss. We talked about them at staff developer. The building itself, we had a little bit of discussion about whether this building has an iconic element or a defined enough cap to it. They've shown a 3D image there at the top to help give it a little more perspective, because I think that was one of the issues with the original submittal. It was kind of hard to tell from 3D how that building would look. So that's something I think we need to maybe, y'all need to talk about. It's how you feel about that. He's got banding. He's got some differential colored brick in there. He does have a cap on it, but what are your thoughts on those two components of the design standards?
How are you with the perspective of it with the buildings and the development next to it?
I think it blends pretty well with the building. I mean, obviously it's much smaller,
But
it's the same architect, and I think he's tried to have some symmetry as much as you can, I suppose, between such a large building and such a small building. There's different ways that you can address the iconic standard, the cap standard, defined cap, and this is how they're proposing to do it. I just wanted y'all to, get your feedback on that and whether you thought that was looked good in the context.
I'm not an expert on this by any means, so forgive me if I make a comment that may be out of line, but when I looked at this, when I was studying this earlier this week, it just hit me as plain Jane. You know what I mean? I just like to see a little bit of irregularity or something to it to give it some character of its own. Does that make sense?
I know. Trent Farrell, 1313 Camille Road, Knoxville, Tennessee. Much smaller building than one next door.
Right.
Designed it. This is.
Looking building, the
Thank you.
bank building.
Thank
yes.
you. We feel that in doing this, being such a small scale, that doing the change in brick color and everything is fairly iconic enough. It's so small. I mean, we're talking 3,000 square feet. And if you start doing other things, it could get much, excuse me, I have to take a phone call. I'm in the middle of talking.
The meter's running.
while he's on the phone, does anybody have any questions for Mark that they would like to ask him at this point?
How do the rest of you feel about this?
Well, I had a comment about the front. I think we're on the right track, but,
This is the building owner, so,
okay.
yes.
Watching on TV.
Yeah.
Can we answer any other questions in regards to the
Want
subject
to
twos?
talk about the connectivity, Mark?
Yes, the cross connectivity. Actually, he needs to answer that too.
Drainage.
What about it?
How are you with the drainage
They are using and it kind of satisfies their low impact development.
It's actually a combination. Mark, if you don't mind, I'll take it.
Yeah.
If you notice, they're right there in front of the back of the building, right in the arc there. That is going to be all a relatively new product. It's a 6,000 PSI porous concrete paver system to let the water literally infiltrate down through the stone. We'll have a underground, what I call is a hybrid. It's a hybrid detention infiltration program, which will handle the stormwater requirements all the way to the 100-year storm and also encourage infiltration into the ground prior to discharging. And we're actually discharging into the unnamed tributary to Little Turkey Creek at half of what we have to. I mean, we could actually decrease the size of it, but it works out really nice at this size to release. At the 100-year storm, we're allowed to release like 3.7 CFS. We're releasing 1.3. So, and we'll also be encouraging a lot of infiltration in that area. So,
I thought that was an excellent feature.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Also, we're using them because of we're 4 spaces over. The 4 spaces directly behind the proposed office are all done in the same paver system, and we will interconnect those so that they drain also into the same under-drain system underneath the other permeable pavers. So we'll end up with a hybrid system that does create a low impact. It'll be actually a much better situation. In fact, I just saw the vendor just provided me a video today where they took a 4x4 portion paver of this, took a 2-inch hose and literally put it straight down on it. It went right straight through it. Then they took a bucket of sand, threw it over the top of it, and went straight through it. And it still permeated right straight through it. You don't have to rely on like on permeable pavers, you're relying on the seams of the pavers to get the water down. The whole 4 feet is porous. It goes right straight down. And it'll handle, it's 6,000 PSI concrete. I have another video that they show taking a fully loaded concrete truck over one of these pavers that's suspended on the edges and it doesn't break. So it'll handle the load of a fire truck without batting an eye.
Well, what I'm excited about is you're taking a site that is an old paved site that appears to be 100% impervious. I'm sure there was some area of gravel and grass, but there wasn't much there. So you're taking a site with 0 water detention and 0 water quality, and now bringing that site into compliance. And much less you're getting rid of an old ugly building and putting up something new that is exciting.
Well, actually, in doing the calculations, the existing site was almost 70% impervious. Post-construction, it's like 33% impervious.
Well, I certainly commend you, but don't get me wrong for making the first comment that I did. I commend you for developing this site.
Okay, well, I didn't take it wrong.
Yeah,
I didn't take it wrong.
I hope not.
I'm going to let him finish answering his questions now that he's off the phone.
Trent, you want to go back to
I'm
architecture?
glad to see something go there.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ed.
No, that was one of the things that caught me about your design, because I had seen that before, and you answered a lot of the technical questions. But my only other question would be, are you familiar with one that's anywhere in the proximity of Knoxville that is it operation?
Not at this time. We'll be the first one in Knoxville using these permeable porous pavers. They're porous concrete pavers. Now, I have
Storm Tech's chamber system. Is that?
we're going to use Storm Tech, but after talking to the vendor who provides those and another type of a similar system, to limit the possibilities of screw up during construction, we may be changing to what is called a Terra Arch, which is actually a concrete arch system. So it's less chance of them crushing during construction. And it'll be equivalent size, same volumes, everything like that. But it may be it'll be a lot more stable.
It's concrete instead of plastic.
It's concrete instead of plastic, yes. And we can actually go a smaller footprint and get the same volumes, which actually helps. And also the other thing is the Terra Arch, when we'll have the arches, and like on the plan that's shown there's a string of Storm Tech arches, then another string, and then there's 2 that actually feed in. With the Terra Arch, we'll have 2 sets of 3 chambers facing into a inner chamber in the middle, and that all will all interconnect and have one pipe that comes straight into the same structure and act the same way as what we're doing now. It'll actually create, and it also has a full 24-inch diameter access port that gets down in the middle, so you can actually walk down in, and instead of using a camera to inspect it, you can actually get down and physically inspect if there's debris and other things in there that needs to be cleaned out.
Wouldn't you go with that initially then?
Because I wasn't aware of it, and the vendor brought it up, and that I've been talking with, and he pointed out the advantages of it to me. If I had known about it, I would have used that initially. I wasn't aware of it.
All right.
How would you introduce debris in it? Just like the downspouts is probably the only way, like the gutters or downspouts, the only way
Yeah,
you
that'd
could.
be the only way that I know of to get
It's
down
not
there.
going to go through the porous paver.
The porous pavers will let some fines through that can fit through the gaps and the porosity of it. If it's like a real fine clay,
Okay.
that may get some down in there. But its chances of it getting all the way into the chambers is going to be very little because it's got to go through the stone. First, it's got to go through the porous pavers. Then it's got to go through the stone. And then it's got to come up into the chamber. So, but it does make it a lot better and safer designed from a standpoint of inspections. And this is, let's put it this way, the vendor has asked me that once we get this installed to write a paper on it because the city of Chattanooga is looking at this as a possibility of something they would recommend.
Are you implying that you'll probably go with the Terra Arch then?
Yes, I'm probably going to be changing to the Terra Arch. It's exactly the same. The calculations are exactly the same. It's just a different product. That's all it is.
Sounds like a superior product.
It is a little more expensive though, too, also. But they have the nice drawback, the nice thing about it is, from a construction standpoint, you eliminate the possibility of the chambers crushing during the filling of the stone.
And then you add the additional advantage of the inspection
Yes,
possibly.
the larger, because the Storm Tech, the biggest inspection port is 12 inches in diameter. So the only thing you can get down there is a camera to inspect anything. And I like the ability, I'm sorry, but underground detention scares the living out of me. And I like the ability to crawl around in there. Someone could crawl around down there with a headlamp and a flashlight, and you can inspect it and see if there's something wrong.
Big advantage.
Okay, now, he's off the,
Well, I have one more question.
Go ahead.
And I guess this is for you. The gas tanks that used to be there,
they're gone.
okay. and
They've been
I-
gone before we even purchased the property.
Okay,
They had to be
so-
gone before you could purchase the property.
Okay, so
And it had to have a clean bill of
environmentally,
health
all
from the
that's taken
state.
care of.
Yeah, it's all had to have a clean bill of health before you could purchase the property.
Okay.
Yes. Now, I do have a question for Mark, though, in regards to one of the comments is the landscape plan has to be redesigned or stamped by a registered land professional. Actually, in the state of Tennessee, anything under 5,000 square feet, I can stamp.
What does it say? Trying to see.
And the guy who did it is
Well,
got a 4-year degree in landscape design and architecture. And I trust his judgment, because he mirrored basically what's going on across the
Fine.
way.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. We're keeping it all in the family here.
Is that a subject too that we need to
Can we
address?
Can we eliminate that subject, Jim?
That meant what that really was is that the revised landscape plan, which was in this revised site plan set, needs to be
Put the
formally
VRRB.
approved. Yeah, and it'll be on their agenda on the 28th. You
And I'll
can
be here
strike
for
it
it.
if
I'll
you
be here
want.
for it on the 28th to take care of that.
Yep.
And I'll let the architect get back involved, because that's his business, not mine.
But also going back, let's do a little history here. We first came with this site of totally redoing the Weigels building in place and totally redesigned it. I didn't bring pictures of it, but it actually was a more attractive building than this. But we had a little bit of disagreement on the definition of building with the BZA. Well, they said anything under roof, and then they said the canopy was not under roof. So that caused a problem. And so then we came back with this other option. Doing something additional on the front, along the lines of this, I may approach.
We're not that formal, Trent.
Yeah, I had one question.
Yeah, okay,
about
that was kind of a recommendation that I had at staff developer. Was this something that that your client is,
That's exactly what my question is.
there? Is that something that you guys are comfortable with, or I mean, architecturally?
Yeah,
What are your thoughts about that?
architecturally, we're fine with it. I mean, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, because
So that breaks the monotony.
that's exactly what my
Okay.
question was going to be, because in your plan, it looks like it's, in our package, it looks like it's inset and still straight across.
No,
This one
no,
gives us
it was
some
not.
relief. Well, I'm looking at the drawing, and I certainly know how to read the drawing.
It sticks out 4 inches.
No, right here, it doesn't.
Well, he's talking about the you guys are talking about two different things. Ed's talking about
Oh,
the
no,
parapet.
I'm talking
You're
about the brick each side of that setback sits out. The white brick sits out.
and then Ed's, I think, talking about the little alcove.
It's in a
Yeah, I
different
see.
plane, and then it goes back into a little alcove.
I see what you mean, but you've also got the
I
cap
don't
there
see it drawn.
that's up higher, isn't it? Here.
Yes.
I like that because
It would
it
be
seems
killing
to
the
break
front
the
end.
monotony.
Exactly, it
to
comes
me.
across straight across the front.
Yeah.
This is exactly what my recommendation would be.
And I think to me that it gives us the iconic
Just
element
enough relief so it doesn't look
definition.
like flat across.
Okay. I mean, we have no problem with doing that.
I'm happy with that.
Okay.
It gives you a little bit of oomph.
Did you guys see? Yeah. That's much better.
That will need to be given to Mark because we'll enter that into the record. So it's important it ends
Yeah, I
up down
haven't
there
seen
at
that.
Mark Shipley.
Yeah.
Because that's part of our approval process tonight.
Know what I'm looking at on resubmittal.
I think we're past architecture. You guys want to talk connectivity
Connectivity with the,
with your neighbor to the east, or
Yeah.
what may or may not ever be developed there?
well,
I'll talk about that just a little bit, real briefly. In the C1 district, we changed the added connectivity language to the C101, C2.
is that on the zone, is that online yet, Mark?
Yeah, it is now. That was during the process when they were
I looked for it
updating all
today
that.
and could not find
It
it.
should be, yeah.
All I saw was a footnote under
Yeah, I think
our,
that's good.
local roads. That was all that ever mentioned.
Yeah, it's on there. Well, anyway, it's a context appropriate connectivity requirement. So you got to look at the context to what they're asking to not have a connection in the context of this site, because as Mark shows in this handout, the property to the east, which is actually about over 9 acres, because it goes all the way up the hill and backs up to Old Stage Hill subdivision. But there's a stream that runs in behind the Weigels property, and then it kind of goes at an angle as you go to the east. Let me see if I can draw. I'm just trying to outline what their logic is. But it kind of goes at an angle.
Well,
So
we gave
what?
everybody a map right here.
Yeah,
Mark.
that's fine. I just want it for the public. They don't have the map. So it goes at an angle. So it leaves you with, at least on the north side of the creek, a small, very small area. It
Once we
really
figure
is-
all aquatic setbacks
Pretty-
and losing everything, it's
very
about
difficult.
2/10 of an acre.
Yeah, very difficult to do anything with. I don't know why.
And I'm not sure how you would ever, I mean, I'm counting contour lines in there. There's nearly 100 feet of fall
Yeah, from that top, yeah.
from the
It's-
top to the bottom that I'm not.
I am.
I can't conceive the day that this would ever be developed. Not to say that it can't. I'm just saying it's cost prohibitive to develop it due to the topography and really the way those dash lines are. They actually show a sinkhole. Now, it may have an opening because of the culvert down there, but it actually kind of shows those little hash lines are showing, closed contours.
I think in the context of the setting, the staff is not opposed to not having a connection here, because if you look at the bigger picture, if that property to the east ever develops, realistically they're going to somehow have to try to get an access into Way Station Trail on the south side of the creek. So I don't really see that little triangular area as being, anything happening to that really. The only benefit it could possibly have is for this property to acquire it and incorporate it into theirs, but that's the only entity that I see it has any value.
Well,
Yeah, that's
But
what,
that's not my decision to make. I'm just pointing that out. I think given the context of this setting and what you're connecting to, I think there's a reasonable argument for it not being required as part of this site plan.
I agree as well. We would never allow a lot that small to be individually platted. And if the applicant wants to purchase that from the owners next door and then come back with a site plan at some later date for extra parking, they could do that. But I just don't see a need for an easement that's just useless.
I don't think it's
That is a different owner.
Yes, it is.
it's a different.
Excuse me, I didn't hear that. It's a different owner.
I mean, I'm very pro connectivity, but you do have to look at the context, and I think in this particular case, it's a situation where it probably just doesn't make any sense for that connection.
Does that require a separate action item, Mark Shipley?
No,
right here.
it doesn't require a separate action item because it does give you that flexibility for it to
Contextual.
be context based. Yeah.
Any more questions or comment, or anyone in the audience have a question?
I don't know if there were any other discussion points I didn't have any other than the staff subject tos that were
And we're okay with the subject choose.
included in that.
I mean, obviously, the issue of the right-in, right-out, something's going to have to go in front of the mayor, board, and alderman, but if it gets denied, we'll work around it and keep going forward, try and get approved, subject to.
Yeah, we still feel it's a life safety issue.
You still feel what?
That the egress-
We still feel it's a life safety issue that we don't have two means of egress out of this site. We give him the right in.
Understand.
Yeah, that can totally go away. That's fine, but being able to get out, get fire trucks around, ambulances around.
Well, Trent, keep in mind your application was for a right-in and a right-out, and that's what we denied was a right-in, right-out as presented in your plan.
Yeah, which we would probably will come with just a right out.
We understand.
Had to go back to them, wouldn't you?
Otherwise, we're agreeable to all the rest of the subject twos.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Mark, do we need to change anything in here before we?
Make a motion about, or an amendment to the building elevation
Okay.
per the discussion dealing with the,
do we need to take out the language where it says landscape professional,
you can, yeah, that's fine.
Please.
I'm fine with that.
even though?
I understand.
Don't make my nephew mad.
Don't
Try
make
not
my
to block
employee
you in.
mad.
Give you the,
I've seen his nephew's work. It's a lot better than a lot of LAs that I've seen.
I thought you were about to say it's a lot better than mine.
No, LA, landscape architects.
it didn't say registered, licensed.
Yeah, licensed landscape architects, yeah.
Okay, are you going to take a stab at all this? Ed?
Well, I'm making a motion to approve the site plan with the adjustment of the elevation sheet provided, and also to address the language in item 5 regarding the landscape professional to be not required, register or licensed landscape architect. Let do it.
Is that?
That's fine.
I'll second the motion.
We'll put his name Travis in there.
That would make them happy.
That would make him happy.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 8, discussion and public hearing on a request to correct an error in the zoning designation for property at 12603 Evans Road to change designation from R-1 rural residential to A agricultural, town of Farragut, Africa.
We discussed this last month as a workshop item. There was an error made all the way back in 2003 when the farm at Willow Creek was rezoned, and some of the properties around it were also rezoned. This particular property was accidentally changed from agricultural to rural residential. The owner found out about it and has asked the town to revisit that and to have that correction made so that he has the agricultural district restored to his property. The staff is recommending approval of Resolution PC-17-10, which recommends approval of Ordinance 17-18 to correct this error.
Mark, do you have any idea, is this section in front of it, is that R1?
One, yeah, everything is R1 over there on the north side of Evans Road. And all that used to be agricultural. I don't know what happened there. It was obviously 14 years ago, and I have no idea how that happened.
You were just a kid then.
I was not a kid, but I was younger than I am now.
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution PC-17-10, which recommends approval of Ordinance 17-18.
Second.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item number 9, discussion on a concept plan, and this is for discussion only, correct?
Yes.
Discussion on a concept plan for a restaurant proposed on parcel 63.08, tax map 151, western out parcel in front of Renaissance Farragut, zone C-1, 1.34 acres, GBS Engineering, Mark Balick, applicant.
Madam Chairman, I am involved in this particular project, and I will be recusing myself from the discussion and any subsequent future votes on it.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a concept site plan, which we don't really have a concept site plan application, so it's just one sheet. And really what they're wanting to do is just get your all's thoughts on some of the macro issues that they need some guidance on before they start spending a lot of money on the design and the development of the property. This is the westernmost out parcel, the Renaissance. It's smaller than the eastern one. It's only 1.36 acres, and it actually kind of has a lot of physical constraints. It has a stream to the south side. There's a drainage way on about the eastern third of the property, and then to the west there's a kind of a very steep drop off for the adjoining property there. So it doesn't look constrained from the street, but then you get out and walk the property, and it's pretty apparent that it does have some natural limitations potentially, or opportunities, however you want to look at them. There is no detention shown on this because that was addressed and accommodated as part of the Renaissance development in their larger stormwater basin east of this site. The proposed building is a little over 3,500 square feet. They are utilizing, again, that modification that was made to the front yard setbacks. The parking is to the side and the back. Actually, it's to the back of the building. They have outdoor seating to the east side of the building that would face that natural drainage area. So there's some things that I think, and they may have some other things they want to get your all's input on, but the staff reviewed this. We talked about it in a staff developer meeting with the applicant, and some of the things that we identified that we probably need some discussion about. The first one was the connectivity requirement. We talked about that with the previous site plan that we looked at. There is that requirement now in the C1 for context-appropriate connectivity, vehicular and pedestrian, between properties. As the site lays currently, probably the only topographically possible area topographically at this point, if you're going to make a connection, would actually be up at the front part. Because when you go to the south, this whole area in here is a really big ditch drainage area, kind of like what we faced with the O'Reilly's Auto Parts. It's heavily wooded. That whole property to the west, it would be very challenging to ever develop, frankly. I'm sure you could do it, but it would take a lot of money and a lot of effort because it's got a lot of constraints to it. So the question would be whether, as part of this plan, it makes sense to have some kind of connection or at least a platted easement to the western property, and where should that be located. Actually, having the building up close to the street like they're showing it is something we've been trying to encourage, and their pre-planned access as part of the initial Renaissance development, that placement of the building actually works well with that because it places the parking to the south of the building, which lines up better with where that pre-planned access was or is back here in this location. So you could move the building away from the front and make that cross-access connection. That is one option, but it would, affect other things, other elements of the site, and it may not be, what you desire as far as the presentation of a site from Kingston Pike. The property to the west is not connected to the property west of it. So you would only be, at least in the short term, be connecting to that one property. It wouldn't connect on to Hobbs Road eventually at this point. So those are some of the things to think about. I don't know if you wanted to just talk about these individually or if you want me to go through the different discussion points that the staff thought about with the applicant, or how you want to deal with that. You want to just talk about connectivity first and just have a discussion on that?
I'd like to, because I'm a little bit in the dark here.
Site and it making a connection to the west, a physical connection at this time, other than the very front of the property, would be not very challenging.
From the back, it looks like it would be very,
Yeah,
very
you've got a
challenging.
sanitary sewer easement, and you got the stream back there. So you got the aquatic buffer in the back. You
Very
really
small
couldn't.
space in the front.
Small
of the building,
space,
right?
yeah.
That would take away from some of the desire
So-
to put the building closer to the road.
It would.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got to kind of balance those things. I think what you could do, just planning for the future, if you all felt this was an appropriate action and the applicant was in agreement, was at least plat some kind of an access easement somewhere along that western property line where it might make sense should, conditions change in the future, so that we're not eliminating the possibility of a connection happening at some future date. Of course, that connection would affect another discussion point that we have on the parking in a minute, but because you would have to take at least a couple of parking spaces out if you made a physical connection in the future. So that's something to think about. I guess what I'm talking about there in that is stubbing out an access easement, kind of like what we did with the O'Reilly Auto Parts, where it really didn't make any sense in the present time to have that because it's a huge ditch and it goes into the county. It's similar to that in this context, but at least you wouldn't be nullifying the possibility of that happening in the future, should that be desirable.
Mark, can
Yep.
I make a suggestion?
Yep.
In lieu of platting a line showing an easement, could they do a note that says if at some time in the future, the adjacent property is developed, that both parties will agree to discuss a cross-access easement, and at that time, if it's mutually appropriate for both parties, agree to a cross-access? Use a note instead of a line on the plat? You're still having up with the same situation, but at least that way you don't have a line that has to be moved or whatever. It's just a note.
Yeah, that or you just plat a generic access easement.
You're still drawing a line.
Yeah. Maybe, I don't know.
You could still make a note that goes with it. That
I was
says
gonna say,
it's not,
well,
it's
no,
not
well-
specific location. It's shown for
Location would,
information, not-
yeah.
See, the thing is, every time I've drawn a line on a drawing, I have to put a note in there. Every time I draw a line on a drawing, I have to put a note in there.
Right.
See, the thing is, every time I've drawn a line on a drawing, in a situation like this where you're trying to predict the future, it's always, 100% of the time, in the wrong spot.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I'm just saying you might be able
That's
to put
why
a clarifying note that goes with that, saying it's a
Well, that's
general
why
location
I would
issue.
rather have a note that says the same thing you're trying to do, but it gives them, the current property owners, the Myers brothers, and the adjacent property owner, the ability to discuss it and create something that is mutually agreeable to both parties. And it still gets the connectivity that you're looking for.
What happens if they can't agree?
You can't predict the future. That's what this easement's for, something in the future. We don't know what the future's going to hold, but at least that way the two parties are required to discuss it. And the note will go with the property. If the Myers brothers sell the property, the note goes with the property.
I probably would have to talk with the town attorney about that. It might be possible. I don't know. I'm not unopposed to
I'm just
looking
trying
into
to
it.
throw another idea out there. I'm not saying we're not opposed to it. We just, instead of drawing a line,
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
you're giving
yeah.
a note that requires that discussion to be occur and, if at all possible, occur.
Yeah, I can talk with Tom about that and see what would be a good way to try to address that.
I certainly agree there's no time to force one in it.
Yeah.
That's-
The decision is don't have one at all or deal with it in some general way.
And that's another option, is just not requiring one at all.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another.
Two choices, I see.
Right. And I think, I can't speak for them, but I believe they would agree that they would prefer none, but if we have to do one, a note would probably be a better solution, because that way all the parties involved, and it would have to discuss it. And it would have to be a discussion that's required by plat. It's just kind of like, Ed, like we were talking about the access for 12,700. By plat, we couldn't do it, because there was a note on plat that says there shall be no access.
It's kind of one of those.
It's the same type of thing. This being a note that says there will be a discussion to discuss cross-access.
Well, we'll talk about how to deal. I'll talk with town attorney about that and get his thoughts on it. But I think you understand all I'm saying is if you even want to have them have a connection, or for the future, is at least just, not prohibit that from occurring should
Right.
all conditions align
Right.
themselves, and it.
Plan is going to align.
Yeah, align, because it's going to take a lot
Oh,
of
yeah.
alignment.
Oh, yeah.
for
Oh,
that
yeah.
to-
And Mark, you were,
The connectivity, if I may ask, is so that you have access from that property?
Well, it's to take a lot of the burden off of first of all, space and access points out, especially on highly traveled roads.
Right.
And then to give, it's just a much safer situation because you have fewer conflict points and people can get from one property to another without having to, go back onto a more heavily traveled street and then turn in. It would be kind of crazy to let's say they put a building to the west there. If you had topographically favorable conditions and you could make a connection without question, it would be silly to not do that, because if you wanted to go to that new building to the west of this building, you'd have to, if you needed to do it by car, you'd have to get back out onto Kingston Pike, make a left, which would be
Right.
challenging, and then make another left into the property. So you're just trying to avoid that, just like we did on Parkside Drive, where you can go most of Parkside Drive without getting onto Parkside Drive. You can go
Yeah.
through the developments, and that's a good thing.
Well, I
'Cause
can
you're-
see that would be feasible if it weren't such a challenge to
Yeah, and
go
that's-
through the parking lot there.
Absolutely. It
Yeah.
is a challenge on
West,
this side.
yeah.
It
and Mark,
is.
you brought up the fact that the building is in the front. Well, I can tell you personally that Noah and I sat down and tried to draw the building to the rear, and to do it to the rear, we lost parking.
I could believe that because of the
I
way
like
it was
the-
pre-designed.
I like the restaurant up closer to the road.
Well, and having the access further away from Kingston Pike gives you better stacking.
Right.
It's just a better situation because
Absolutely.
turning movements into the property. When we were talking about changing the C1, that was one of the benefits of having buildings moved up to the street, is because it allows that parking, that first row of parking, to be further away from the intersection with the feeding street. So you've got better stacking. You don't have a situation where somebody's turning into the property and they get rear-ended because they have to slow down because they're making a sharp turn into the development. They can come on in and have a distance before they actually make the turn into the project.
Right. How much frontage is there on Kingston Pike of that lot to the west?
To the west, it has a fair amount of frontage. It's the old way station site. It has a lot of asphalt out there. It's got the stream
Right.
to the back.
Yeah, I remember pulling in there the other day when I went down there to look at that site.
It's got a lot of challenges.
So, but if it were developed, what I'm thinking is we would be
It would
way
probably
more
have a
than
building
400
up front.
feet from that.
Because of the
intersection.
stream and the topography, if that site were to develop to the west, to me, the logical place to put it would be up front, just like this building.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we wouldn't have a problem with complying with the 400-foot distance between an
I think
access
they could
point
get
to
an
Kingston
access
Pike.
point 400 feet from this access
From-
point.
yeah.
What about, and I'm playing devil's advocate, but what about from Old Arts Barbecue?
Well, that's way further west. Yeah.
Okay.
I measured it on KGIS, and there'd probably have to be a small variance granted for
Oh,
a
really?
driveway cut somewhere along that property in between the two, but
Okay.
it would be the only means of ingress and egress for it.
Yeah, because there's that business down
That
there.
florist is next to
Yeah,
it.
I have not looked into it at
Yeah.
all. I was just asking a question.
It's kind of a free-for-all right now down there. It's
I'm more in favor of no connectivity at this time.
how's the rest of you feel about that?
And I am too, and you're going to check with Tom about.
Yeah, I
the
can check with
appropriate
him
way to-
about options that we might have to provide for that in the future, should that be desirable, both parties.
Mark, separate question on the.
Yes, sir.
On the, there's a entrance shown to the south, or an exit, I guess it is, because the way the arrow's drawn, and
Yes.
there's a few parking places. What's going on in that area? with
That is to, if you notice also, there's a dumpster enclosure
Yeah.
at the end.
Yeah.
That's basically more for a little bit of employee parking
Okay.
and/or customer parking, but it's also to provide access to a dumpster for a dumpster truck. That's basically what it's there for. It's to get, we didn't have any place on the other side left to put a dumpster enclosure, and that works out to be it's the least ideal location, to be honest, but we also thought it was far enough away from Kingston Pike, because I really don't think you even want a dumpster enclosure right next to Kingston Pike.
Where that area is?
No.
It's back here.
Yeah.
Yeah, right there, right
Yeah.
there.
Employees
The
are going to get their
dumpster.
exercise,
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that was one of my comments. That's
Yeah,
a good
actually-
walk from the.
Actually, Noah and Nick have talked to the potential client to take it on, and he's totally okay with it.
Okay.
Now, we also, one of the things that has not been discussed, is we don't have to do detention, but we need to do water quality. We'll probably do something similar to what I'm proposing to do 12640, is something similar to that. Not as elaborate, because there we had to provide detention and water quality. This would just be more of a, maybe like take one of those little fingers of parking and just make it all permeable pavers, and then have the water infiltrate down into it, and then let it slowly seep into the creek. Something along that lines. That meets low impact, and it also gets the water quality issue.
What kind of seating capacity is anticipated in that restaurant?
120? Is that including the patio? Inside 100? 120 with the patio,
In the patio?
including the patio.
Parking places are there?
Not enough.
Let's talk about that. That's another macro site issue, is parking. It is a restaurant, and that's our highest ratio use in the
Right.
commercial. It's 1 per 100 plus 1 per 200 square feet of discernible outdoor seating. So this site, based on the site plan before you, would be required 39 spaces, and they have 30 as shown.
And they are
I
working
believe.
with the the Myers Brothers have been working with the potential client to create cross-access parking on the south side, on the existing parking that's on the south side of the creek, on the same side as the building.
Yeah, part of if you're going to take advantage of that shared parking that we provided when we updated our parking and loading, is that you can do that, but you got to meet certain conditions. The parking spaces that you're using on the other site have to be excess spaces. They have to be within 500 feet of this development. They have to be accessible safely by pedestrians and lit, so that you could safely get from one to the other in all conditions.
Would there be a sidewalk accessibility?
They'd have to add one. Yeah, they'd have to add one.
I know where that, I think I know
There's a
where
bridge
that parking
there,
areas
yeah.
you're
We
talking
will
about.
be adding a sidewalk to
They'd
provide
have to do that,
accessibility.
yeah. And then the other condition was that it couldn't be more than a third, which they'd be fine with that, of the required amount of parking. The parking is, it's something that I think the person that's interested in occupying the building is, needs to really think about too, because, restaurants are potentially a high parking demand use. And that's one of the things that we pose as a question as to whether this property, given its physical conditions, really is big enough for a restaurant use. Now, that's not our decision to make, but it's just something to think about. I think certainly the parcel to the east would clearly be big enough. But this one, is something, you don't want a situation where you don't have enough parking and people are kind of parking in unapproved locations that could create issues.
Well, another concern of mine is where is the entrance going to be?
The entrance
Primary
to the building?
entrance.
It'll be on the south side of the building, but they also have access to the east side. Well, actually, I think they have access to the north, east, and south, right? Okay. Everything but the west. They have the outdoor seating is on the east side of the building.
Where would you drop off somebody if you had to park in that space back there at the back, way back here? You presumably had an old timer like me. My husband would probably drive through that parking lot and try to let me out and
Yeah, it'd
walk
be
into the
pretty
restaurant.
long.
I'm trying to
you
figure out.
got to provide for
logistics.
convenient parking, not just parking, but it does have to be
Yeah.
convenient. I'm sure they'd have the employees park in the shared parking on the south side of the drainage, and that's perfectly logical.
Yeah, I would assume that.
But, the question is whether you have enough even on this site
Yeah, I
for
mean, even
the
if you had to
customers.
park back there in the back, the furthest in that lot, that might be a sizable distance for a handicapped person.
Yeah.
I was being facetious a little bit. Right now, I can still walk.
Well, the handicap spaces have to be near the entrance, and they
I
are.
see the two marked off there.
That's all that's required based on the amount of parking.
I was just talking about drop-off. Yeah. Okay.
Probably in the south side of the buildings where you drop them off, where the handicap spaces are.
Well, I think, the situation we remember through the decade is the situation that the former Albury's had.
Absolutely.
And where the
Yeah.
parking and the shared arrangements and stuff just got to be too burdensome that we don't have an Albury.
Yeah.
So we pick, just everybody goes into it with their eyes open, what's happening here possibly, so.
A good point. I'm Nick Myers, 521 Stone, Vista Lane. One of the things we've spent a lot of time talking about is the cross-park arrangement. Obviously, we have, 180 or 250 parking spots that we have in the Renaissance as a whole. Maybe we have more than that. I'm not sure. But, the way we looked at it is that where the parking demand peaks is not going to be at the same time. So if the building behind it, obviously you can go there now and you can see what we call the pad for building C. although Building C, which is directly to the south of this, has not been built yet, the parking lot's there. It's actually striped. We use it for a farmer's market. If you go out there on any given Saturday, you'll see that it's full, but that's about the only time there's cars in it. And so it's kind of the same lines here, is that, the restaurant being on that or in the western outlot, when they peak, when their demand fills the parking lot up, which typically going to be at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock at night. If you look at the rest of our Renaissance, it's basically empty, except for the other restaurants that are there, which are not in that area. So I think that's part of, I think that, us as the developers and the owners of the property, I think it's more important that we have an understanding of that. It's very clear, it's very important that our tenants have an understanding of that. But I don't really look at it as, if we're supplying ample parking during the time of need, that I think that, let us decide that if that makes sense.
Well, in your case, you all, it's not like you're the insurance company next to Albury's, for example. You all have some integrated control over that area.
I don't think it's a question in my mind of adequate parking. It's the location of the parking. That's why I was asking the question
It's
about the
convenient
drop-off.
parking.
The convenience
yeah.
of the drop-off, because
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying. I think it's, in a utopian site, we have ample parking, but not overparked. We have plenty of trees, but not too many trees. We have a place to drop off, but we don't have a sea of asphalt. And so, that we start out a project with all those goals, and we do everything that we can within the constraints of the property to create the most efficient design that we possibly can. Are everything that we design perfect? Absolutely not. But we think that they're absolutely the best design that they can be within the constraints that we have.
So when you pull in the driveway there off of your access road there into Renaissance,
Yes, ma'am.
the natural flow of a drop-off would be to the right as you come through the driveway there, right? Toward
Yes,
the
ma'am.
handicap spaces,
Yes, ma'am.
like Mark said. And then, is there going to be ample room to turn there
Well,
to get back out?
let me throw out something. And,
All right.
we had talked a lot in the office about what I'm getting ready to propose, and it's kind of hard to explain, but I'm going to do my best because you've opened the door here. If the front setback of the building in the new C1 allows us to be 20 feet from the property line. And it's kind of funny because we're the ones that, requested and carried that text amendment through. Well, the first time we go to use it,
Right.
we have this funny constraint, and I'm going to try to explain it. The TDOT way station that is predominantly to our west on property that we don't own does in fact bleed, if you will, a little bit in front of us. And you can see how Kingston Pike is running at a plane that's straight ahead, and the right-of-way has the way that my brother explains it. If you think of a bulge in a snake right after they've eaten,
Yeah,
there's this bulge there.
I see.
And it has pushed our building. If you look at the northeast side, we are 31 feet from the property line. If you look at the northwest side, we're 21 feet we're 20 feet from the property line. But yet Kingston Pike stays on a straight plane, and if this body would entertain the idea that the intent of the 20-foot was more in line with Kingston Pike and not these very unique situations where we have a TDOT way station where the right-of-way on Kingston Pike is artificially increased, allowing us to move the building to the north 11 feet, which would be in keeping with the northeast side, and we're not encumbering anybody, we're not encumbering the sidewalks, we're not encumbering Kingston Pike, we're not encumbering the utilities, then a lot of what you are bringing up, we can resolve.
I think that makes very good sense.
What is
Really?
the right of way over 100 feet there? More than 50
Oh,
feet?
it's way over, Mark, and you know,
in
if,
front of that property.
yes.
Well, I think it obviously would be a matter the BZA would have to consider, but I think if that's the case, I mean, that certainly is something that I
makes
think
sense
they
to
could
me.
they could make a
I
consideration
think
on.
it'd make a heck of a better
know that.
flow there for drop-offs.
Oh, we agree.
Northeast
We were
County
just
corner
trying
is
to,
where the proximity is.
you know, when we sit down
We'd have to check.
with a project like this from the very beginning, and maybe this will help you all think about how we start. On one side of the page, we try to write all the tenants' needs and our needs, right, long-term. And then on the right side, the other side of the page, we write all the constraints that we have that are going to cause us to do this. And that was one of the big ones from the very, very beginning. And, you know, we met with the town and, you know, they suggested, why don't you buy the right away from TDOT? And that was, you know,
Well,
a good idea.
what does it-
But
what's it gonna
you know,
take?
it just, it's not feasible for us to be able to do
So
it.
you're saying the platted right of way is more than 50 feet from the center line along the frontage of that lot?
Absolutely.
So what's it going to take to revise
Well,
this?
you'd have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals to.
It's 11 feet, and I
Request.
mean, and that would put it within the intent of, and Mark has a little drawing here, it doesn't, you almost have to back up and show multiple properties and go, you'd have to show all the way down to Big Kahuna Wings to really see it, but you can see this artificial inflation of the right-of-way that's a direct result of the abandonment of the TDOT way station probably 40 years ago.
Versus
Yeah.
this.
We can move this building 11 foot forward.
This is, that corner, you
I didn't know that.
pin everything with this corner.
I hope you'll pursue
Let this
that.
one fall over.
Well, if you all are open to it, it's something that, you know, and BZA is open to it. We think it solves a lot of problems. We try to guess a lot of times what you all are going to think are the, you know, the most important things to, and we were conflicted on how open you would be with it. We thought it had a lot more to do with our ability to explain it, and I tried my best to
Good
explain it
job
today.
of explaining it.
Thank you.
And this is coming from the senior citizen representation of the community. You know, I think it's worthwhile you're pursuing that.
Thank you. We'll try that.
Comment was just that, you know, that drainage way that does come from Kingston Pike north under it just needs to be up, and probably already has been, but we need an evaluation from a qualified hydrologic professional as to what that is. They're not affecting it with their proposal. And in fact, to their credit, they're using it as an amenity because they've got the outdoor seating that's situated to where that would back up to it. So
Talking
that's a
about number
good,
3 there now.
yeah. So that would be a good use of that natural drainage area. Because we were out there and walking the property, and it had not rained in 2 or 3 days, and there was a steady flow of water through there. So it's obviously, you know, something, and it does need to be formally defined as to what it is. So but again, they're not filling it in, so they're trying to leave it as an amenity to the project, but it just needs to be clarified. That'd be further on down with the site development, but it's a nice little natural area. through
As I'm
there.
always saying, it's better than sitting and looking at a parking lot. so.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. And they could enhance landscaping in that even more and make it even more of an amenity to this particular development. I think that was the major issues, at least from what the staff's perspective, on this particular site. I was unaware of the right-of-way situation, but that would have to go through the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Mark, I do have a question.
Yeah.
And it's more of a clarification to make sure we have a full understanding on our side of the expectations. A few minutes ago, when you were explaining the potential cross-park arrangement, you used the word excess parking. Could you explain that?
Now, you could also utilize the timing wording in that section. So it might be, in other words, if you're right at your parking requirements in Renaissance, the only way you could share parking in that situation is if you could demonstrate there's an offset time issue like you just talked about earlier. So if you've got office uses and, that are going to occupy those spaces during the day, but the use you're sharing the parking with is a nighttime user primarily of parking, then you might be able to use that language, to take advantage of those spaces. But you're only talking about, 9 spaces.
Well, no, but it's very important to me and to our kids.
Well, the bottom line is
we don't lose our density.
You don't want to cut off your nose and spite your face because you don't want to share parking if you've already got a site that is under parked or is right at the parking.
No, I
That's
understand.
kind of the logic behind it. So if you can demonstrate that there's an offset in, you may have excess parking anyway with the Renaissance, and it may not be an issue. But if you're right at it, you would just need to demonstrate that there would be the time benefit from the two users.
When you say, just to, again, I try to, I was told when I was a kid that the greatest fears in life are the fear of the unknown, and so I'm trying to make some unknown known. When you say that I would need to demonstrate, how would I do that? Would I write a letter that states that the restaurant we propose is going to peak
I'd have
at
to
7
look
o'clock
at
at night?
yeah, I mean, probably I'd have to look at the language. I don't know if it gets that prescriptive in there. I think the bottom line is just making sure that overall, with the two entities, the site that's sharing the parking and the site that's offering the shared parking, that they are not creating a situation where one or the other is underparked.
Right.
That's the bottom line.
No, I agree. I mean, we're obviously a mixed-use development. We have, unfortunately, it's in the business we're in, we've turned potential tenants away who really, really want to be there, but their parking demand is just greater than we can accommodate without impeding the quality of life of our other tenants. And, but that's all part of it. And so, but I really think that's something for, that's what we have to make that decision.
Yeah, I agree.
So I appreciate your explanation there.
Presently paved area that's back at the rear of this lot,
Yes, ma'am.
that's not part of this lot, is it?
I think that's kind of the area that we're, in our minds, that's going to be the excess parking, but it's
Yeah,
no,
it's not part of
ma'am,
it.
that is, we have the Renaissance separated in multiple lots for a variety of reasons, but the lot that we're looking at today, in fact, is a
In
standalone lot.
places would that accommodate?
I want to say there's about 50 in that, but remember, there'll be, ultimately, eventually, the Renaissance will be built out.
Well, I'm talking about that asphalt area that's on the same side of the access road. It's at the
Yeah,
back of that lot.
Right, I think there's about 48 parking spots in there today.
Now, is that also where you said that was the pad for future development?
Right, there is a building pad there And we are, we're every day pursuing putting somebody in that building. And so that will be the next building that we build. But at the same time, think about it from our standpoint. If we're able to get this approved and get this built and get it all done, we're going to know that we're going to have overflow parking from the restaurant there. And just like we tell a tenant today, if a tenant comes in and says, hey, we'd like to rent this space, and first thing we ask is, well, how much parking do you need? We do that in all the developments that we have, because it seems like that no matter how much parking we have, there's always tenants that need more than that. And so it might be, and it's very, very possible that somebody comes down the road in what we call Building C, who we simply cannot accommodate. But it probably doesn't make any difference if we're cross-parked or not. We're still gonna have that same dilemma. But I really do believe that's a problem that we should burden, and that the government, if you will, make sure we have enough parking, we're doing it right, we're cleaning the water, we're architecturally correct, et cetera, et cetera. But, whether we're overparked or underparked, as long as we're within your constraints, let us work those details out, because we're the one that are
It'd
making
probably be
the
a pretty
capital
good
investment.
position to be in, wouldn't it? To be parked, have too many customers?
Well, yes, it is. It is your. Usually you are blessed that you're overparked, but
Aubrey situation,
at moment in
right?
time, you probably don't feel it.
Unless you're getting an
There's a
Aubrey
breaking point, yeah. So yes, it is a very good problem to have. You're right.
Okay, we've covered all the questions.
Unless they
issues.
have anything else.
No,
they
I
want
appreciate
some
y'all's
guidance
time
on.
tonight. We appreciate everything you do. Thank you. Thanks for hearing
Okay.
us.
We'll look forward to you coming back. Okay, item number 10, discussion on amendments to the Farragut subdivision regulations concerning standards for certain public improvements.
We can go over these. It's something that obviously we have a deficient amount of planning commissioners to really on a workshop item like this, but a lot of these things we've talked about with sites in recent months and years. And some of the things that I went through the subdivision regulations a couple weeks ago, just page by page, and looked at things in there that where there might be some opportunities to do something a little more creative with our public rights-of-ways, our public spaces, and I included some images from other communities in your packet that are on the screen here. Most of these show, like what we talked about with that old Stage Road subdivision, given a wider separation between the street curb and the pedestrian facility to beautify that area and to give a pedestrian more of a safe experience because they're further away from the traveled way. These are just some examples of what that might look like once built out. This looks like a relatively new development with relatively new trees. You got on-street parking here. So one of the things that we talked about was looking at that grass strip width. It's a minimum of 3 feet on a local street. It's 6 feet on collectors and 8 on arterials. The question was whether we should up that minimum to at least 6 feet on local streets, so that at least we're providing for the opportunity for the space to beautify that area. It's kind of a no man's land, really, for mowing and lots of other reasons, because the base stone kind of overlaps that 3-foot grass strip, and it becomes an area that, unless it's irrigated, which is another issue with a pedestrian facility, it can be hard to keep the grass alive in it. So what we're trying to do is create a wider space that's more functional and it has a lot of value. You can take that space and incorporate, bioretention like this. So you're taking some of the runoff from your hard surfaces and actually detaining that within the public right-of-way. That can collectively that can help lessen the size or even the need for stormwater detention basins if you're doing enough of it throughout your development. We haven't really seen any of this on a subdivision scale because I don't think anybody, frankly, in the area maybe has seen it constructed in this area and really know how to do it. There might be some out there, but it's something that personally I would love us to explore, if the community wants to do it. Looking at our streets and our public rights of ways a little bit differently than we have historically, and not just, two traveled lanes for cars and a sidewalk 3 feet from the curb, but think about it a little bit more broadly. How can we use that 50 feet of space for just general people movement of all kinds, bicyclists, pedestrians? How can we make it look attractive and inviting and unique for our community? We have some examples in the town, like the cottages at Price Farms, I think is a great example. They don't have extruded curb. The street runoff runs into those bioretention areas. They look really great. They're unique looking, kind of inviting. They have a lot of separated walking trails in that development, and I think that's one of the reasons why people pay what they do for the size structures that are in that development. It's they've been very successful because it's kind of a place. It's kind of like a Sequoia Hills. It's very unique. It's not just your typical single family.
Just rows of houses.
Yeah, it's something that had some permanent, lasting value to the development and the community. So that's what a lot of these points we're trying to get at. We have low impact development requirements for site plans. Should we consider requiring subdivisions to incorporate some low impact development measures, or incentivize it for someone to want to do that, at least until it maybe becomes a requirement in the future to kind of transition into that? Should we consider actually requiring connectivity, and the only time you wouldn't do it is a case like the subdivision we looked at tonight, where you already have platted house lots around it that are less than an acre. There's really no way to provide a connection, or you have some severe topographic issue, like the road that stubs into the Harville property off Virtue Road, where the grade would be over 20%. That would be a situation where it wouldn't make sense, probably topographically. But to give it more teeth, I guess, so that people really have to make these connections, because I really think making not just pedestrian connections like we have been good at in the past, but making the vehicular connections are really important.
Okay, like you're talking from one subdivision to the one next to it, is that?
Well, it probably wouldn't be from if there's an existing subdivision, unless that subdivision had a stubbed out street, because it would have existing house lots already platted.
Right.
So we wouldn't want to, show a connection to some guy's house lot. That wouldn't make sense.
Right.
But if you had a vacant tract, this would just give it more teeth so there wouldn't be that, you would, as a decision maker, you would say, well, that's a requirement to do that, so a lot of times people come to the commission, and if it's not required, they try to, encourage you to not make them do it.
My concern with that is you're going to end up probably putting more traffic through neighborhoods. Is that?
Well, what you're trying to do is you're trying to disperse traffic and give people more options. Actually, some of the subdivisions in the town that do the best job with that are our older subdivisions like Fox Den, Village Green. You can get in and out of Village Green in several ways, and Fox Den.
Yeah.
In fact, I get lost in there sometimes because it's just, you don't overload your collector streets. That's part of the reason why, and I say this a lot, almost every meeting, Grigsby Chapel Road is the result of single-access subdivisions because people don't have other ways to get to the arterial streets, and they're dumped out onto Grigsby Chapel Road.
Two of my concerns with that is, one, we have in our neighborhood, and I have come across it in some others that I've been cutting through, but there are kids that are playing on the streets. They're
Yeah.
little kids riding bicycles that shouldn't be out by themselves, but they are. And they're playing ball or something in the street. And I'm concerned that if you put more people, more cars through an area, you're going to make a safety issue
Well, I
there.
think the number 5 there in this list of things to talk about is something I personally would like to see us give value to. When somebody submits a subdivision plat, historically all they're looking at is the layout, drainage, utilities. Why don't we have them look at how you're presenting the street? What's it going to look like? What are you going to do to make the street appealing? How are you going to calm it by design so that you're not hopefully having people speeding through your development, that you, by design, you've built into this ways of slowing the traffic down, and you still get that connection to what's around you so that you're not overloading your collector streets. Because if you overload your collector streets, then other users of that facility, like bicyclists, are less likely to use it because it's unsafe. You got too much traffic being concentrated on certain streets. If you can disperse that, it's almost always a positive.
I guess I'm looking at it more of having those kids playing in the street and all that sort of thing is more of a neighborhood feeling to a place. I don't know if that's the right words
Well, to
for
me, connectivity to what's around you gives you a greater sense of neighborhood than having. I mean, my sister used to live on North Shore Drive in a subdivision, and my nephews had friends that lived just next door, 150 feet away. And to go to their house, she had to get in a car, get onto North Shore Drive, which was not a good road to try to get onto, and then go a couple hundred feet and turn into this development. There is no connection from a pedestrian or a vehicular connection, and that's crazy. And they're both new developments that they just didn't, they weren't required to do it, and they didn't do it.
My other concern is from a security standpoint, and the fact that if you have more ways in and out of a neighborhood, you're going to have more possibilities for somebody to rob houses and be able to get out.
Yeah, I mean, there is a disagreement between police and all the other emergency responders, because all the other ones want to have that connectivity so that if something's blocked, they can get into an area in another way. You know, like fire, Dan Johnson would want to have as many connections as possible, but I could understand where the police maybe wouldn't want, because they want to have a controlled access point.
I have a neighbor who's a former security investigator, I guess you would call him, for a insurance company. And I mentioned this to him, and he said, yes, from the standpoint of what he has seen, that, you know, you open up parts of a neighborhood that normally wouldn't get as much traffic, that could lead to robberies and thefts in homes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a point on police, yeah.
Have to weigh the pluses and the minuses. That's, all of your points are well taken,
Yeah.
Rita. But,
I think if you're in an ambulance, the more likely emergency issues are going to be ambulatory, probably, in most situations, unless you live in a really very dangerous area. That's a whole other issue.
Well, a few years ago, there was a person who was going into homes where, in the early evening, where the people weren't home yet, and the person picked homes where he could easily get back out of the subdivision onto
Yeah.
a main road. And it was ones that were closer, in our case, in our neighborhood, it was closer to Old Stage Road there. There was 2 or 3 houses in our neighborhood, and they were all easy to get back onto Old Stage Road.
Same is true for our
Yep.
area, Waverly Court. We just have the one access in, and we've had very few issues in Waverly Court, but those that we have had were closer to the entrance and exit.
Makes sense. You can get out, in and out quickly, yeah.
That could be a case if you have multiple entrances or one entrance.
Yeah.
That would be true.
Sure could, yeah.
Personally, I like the connectivity where it's appropriate in context. I do think that it makes a lot of sense. Some of the things that we've done over on Turkey Creek Road, some of those new neighborhoods, I think were real important. There were some of the earlier ones that we kind of missed that we didn't connect. And if I'm in those neighborhoods, I kind of regret that we didn't do it. And so I do think it would make sense for us to codify a set of regulations that is, when it's appropriate, that would go a little further than just saying we encourage this. Because there's, like I said, there's been a few where they just kind of bow up to us and they say, nope, we're not going to do that. Again, there's times like the Harville Farm where even though there's a road that stubs out, there's a really steep grade there. It can be done if you go across the slope, but and then there's going to be times when there's just not appropriate. And there's going to be some times where a stub out's going to be necessary, and we're just going to have to do the best guess we can of where the property next door is going to develop and what makes sense for them to develop. So we try to put it in the best spot. Again, I think like somebody said earlier, you can't always guess exactly what the future is going to hold. But I do think without making some of these decisions now, we're just not going to get the connectivity. And I think it's okay to have neighborhoods of varying price ranges that are. And if I've heard somebody say something negative about it, they say, well, I live in a $200,000 house neighborhood, and I don't want somebody with a $100,000 house driving through my neighborhood. I disagree with that. I think there is neighborhoods in the town that we have varying price ranges, and they're interconnected, and I think it works well, and I think it does kind of promote a neighborhood feel. There was a long period of time where everybody wanted cul-de-sacs, and cul-de-sac lots are real desirable, and typically they sell for a little bit more money. But I do think the cul-de-sacs are great, and they let the kids, you can play in a cul-de-sac, not necessarily worry about somebody running over you when you're in the cul-de-sac, assuming somebody is reasonably following the rules. But I do think that there are times when the connections do make sense, and when cul-de-sacs, I don't necessarily think that more is better. Sometimes I think less is more.
So you're back to Mark's favorite phrase, context appropriate, right?
Well, I think topography and also the adjacent property. Again, if it's already been developed and all those lots are platted and there's no natural place to do a tie-in, then it just is what it is. But
I'm agreeing with you. No, I was just kidding you.
Oh no, no. But again, I think context appropriate is very important.
It would just give you all a little bit more ability to stand by the regulations where they're pretty much cut and dry, unless somebody can clearly, show that they have a good case for not having the connection. Because a lot of the land left, I don't want 20 years from now the community to look back and say, I wish we'd have done this and this and this, those things. A lot of the southwest part of the town is kind of a blank sheet of paper right now, and it would be kind of nice to do some things that are innovative, kind of like what the cottages has started over there. I think it's a really nice development. It's got a lot of very unique features in it, kind of build on that.
Who maintains this? Does the association?
It just depends on the community. Sometimes it's the public, the towns, and sometimes it's homeowners associations. Like at the cottages, the rain garden area or the bios retention areas, those are maintained by the homeowners associations, and it's part of the plat.
Right.
And that could be certainly now obviously that increases their dues, and that's things
right.
that, but if you look at it more comprehensively and you're kind of taking care of a lot of your stormwater within the right-of-way, and you're making your street kind of unique and more attractive and maybe calming the traffic speeds a little bit, then you have more area on the rest of your property to develop, because you're not devoting a sizable portion of land to a detention basin, a traditional stormwater detention. So you're kind of shifting that to a different location and looking at your public right-of-way in a little bit differently. Is it making it more of a multitask area rather than just a place to move cars largely? I mean, we kind of talked a little bit about this when Saddlebrook had requested that amendment, to allow for the small lot, and we didn't really like what their version of that would entail. But I think a lot of the things that they presented there, to me, have some merit as far as, maybe we maybe do need to look at a small lot, maybe open space type zoning district that would allow somebody to do something like that on the screen, where you could have, rear loaded dwelling units, a lot of green space, kind of maybe clustering your housing in smaller parts of the land, have an overall more open space. So you're kind of giving a developer some incentives, because you're letting them get a little bit higher density, and you're lessening the amount of infrastructure costs because everything's more condensed. And then you're building a product that adds a lot of value and uniqueness to the community.
I sure wish we could get more rear loaded, because I see so much.
It looks a
now.
lot. It's very nice look. Like back here behind the town hall is a really nice looking development.
There's so many of them now that just garages are in the front. It just takes away from.
Yeah, if you remember some of those projects, it looked like all you saw was a big wide driveway and a garage door from the street, and that that doesn't have any lasting value to the development or the community. It's not really providing.
Mine is that way, but I don't like it.
Well, yeah, mine's side entry now, but my first one was front, and it was pretty much garage door. Yeah.
Well, we bought ours because of the side entry.
Yeah. Well, I'll get the rest of the planning commission's thoughts on this too. Obviously, we don't have a full commission. I just wanted to kind of introduce this because I would like to, make some pretty quick changes to low-hanging fruit, at least in the subdivision regulations early next year, to try to get ahead of what might happen in the rest of the undeveloped part of the town.
I'd definitely like to see those grass strips widened.
Yeah, that's kind of a low-hanging fruit that I think
I think that's easy and
Good step for what's left to do.
I think it really. I've personally tried to plant trees within that 3 feet, and they look great for about 10 years. And then we really started having some troubles with them. And hindsight being 20/20, I wish I had 5 or 6 feet to do it. Matter of fact, I might even have done sidewalks on one side of the local and had a wider grass strip, because you do get when you start doing 4 or 5 feet of sidewalks plus 6-foot grass strips. I mean, you end up taking up that whole 50-foot right of way real quickly. You can get up to 48 feet.
That's true.
And so that's a little challenging. So, but again, we don't necessarily require sidewalks on both sides, but I do think it would encourage some of those street trees if we had a little bit more room. So you were talking about low-hanging fruit, or maybe
I think
maybe Rita was talking about low-hanging fruit, but I think that would be one of them. I think that we ought to quickly implement is increase those widths.
My only concern with any of that is that it be properly maintained.
Me too, Rita.
That's true. I agree.
But
I think we need in the subdivision regulations personally, and it's your all's decision, but a plan sheet that addresses the streetscape is something. It would be a completely new thing that people would have to get used to. But how are you making your streets look attractive? How are you going to calm the traffic with your design, so that they're thinking about those kind of things on the front end?
Yeah.
And we're not, anytime you have to incorporate traffic calming into a street, you probably had a bad design from the start. So what we need to do is get ahead of that, and before the street gets constructed, let's take a look at the overall system, their streetscape plan and their traffic calming plan. It could be on the same sheet, how it's going to be maintained, all those kinds of things. Where the street trees are going to go, so that there's a plan in place that would implement street trees actually being planted within that wider space.
But when you have the trees, the leaves are going to fall and they're going to end up in the street, and whose responsibility is that?
Well, you have that with anything. I mean, you have it on your house
Do
lot.
that or pull up the dead flowers.
Well, I think it's in the property owner's best interest to take care of that strip. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
if they said, well, I'm not going to take care of that, I'm going to let it grow 4 feet high with weeds, and they probably...
It's in their front yard.
Yeah.
I mean,
they can't avoid it.
it's kind of like the bioswales at the cottage farm. I mean, if they left it up to the town, I mean, they're probably not going to be held to the same standard that they would want it held to, even though the town does a great job with the Gracie Chapel Islands and
A lot
so
of
forth.
maintenance, I'm sure.
But
Yeah.
but again, we don't want to necessarily burden the taxpayer. But I do think there are some things in there. I do like the incentivizing approach to some of these LID things instead of I like the carrot versus the stick approach. So, but I do think you've made some really good recommendations on here that would make sense. I mean, these are things we've been trying to encourage, and the traffic calming, and we've done a great job with meandering and connectivity and things.
Just need a little more substance, I think,
Right.
in their regulations, probably.
I have a question about the statement. Another approach may be to incentivize rather than require. How do you measure that at the front end of a development? How do you know how much?
Well, you may be creating a new zoning district in some cases, or potentially an overlay that gives people by the language of the overlay, like the OSR, where it doesn't have a lot frontage minimum. 25 feet, but it's much less than the 75 feet on regular residential. Setbacks, maybe just look at, you have to put the building somewhere within this 10-foot area along the front that that allows them to move it closer to the street. Different things like that, increasing the density slightly, but all these things you're incentivizing, but the applicant's also creating something that has lasting value for the community. It's not just somebody's going out and getting as many houses on a piece of property as they can, and then leaving the area, and we're stuck with looking at garage doors and driveways. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to incentivize something, try to encourage somebody to do something a little unique, something that would, again, have long-term value for the community and the people that live in the community, in that particular community. That's okay. Well, anything else on that for tonight, at least? I can work on the low-hanging fruit and try to
Oh, I do.
bring that
One more
together a
quick
little
one.
bit.
On number 8, you talk about connection of open spaces, provide for and connect open spaces. Do you mean like if in a neighborhood there's an open space that I
Yeah.
can go to another neighborhood and get on their open space and have a picnic, or what?
What we need to try to do, and we do this a little bit, but when somebody's developing a property and they, we have the open space requirement, when we're looking at that, don't just look at that property, but look at where they're showing their open space, and can it connect to open space around it, like walking trails,
in
same
another
way.
neighborhood or something?
So it would give you a longer, kind of more linear kind of habitat corridor, if you will. Something, again, that we kind of get bogged down sometimes with looking at utilities or grading or, just lot sizes and things, and we forget about little kind of those things like that.
Well, think of McPhee Park. If you were developing a
Yeah.
neighborhood next door to McPhee
Yeah,
Park, it would
McPhee
make
Park.
sense that if you could connect your open space into McPhee
Oh,
Park
yeah, yeah,
for
sure.
that, like you said, those corridors.
I guess what I was thinking was more like, make it easy for the people in the neighborhood next to my neighborhood, for instance, to come and play on the playground in my neighborhood or something. Is that the sort of
Would
thing?
be kind of like in Sweetbriar. We have the Sweetbriar where there's the picnic or the fire pit kind of parking area, and it also connects to like
Well,
the other
Woodland
neighborhoods.
Trace, yeah, that's a good example.
And the Turkey
Yeah.
Creek. I can't remember what the name of it is.
Yeah, that's three
Yeah,
subdivisions
three
that all have that
yeah.
common open space there.
Yeah.
There's
They
a
all share
walking
one fire
trail that
pit.
goes through there.
And a drainage ditch.
From somebody who's dealt with their homeowners, who's been a part of their homeowners association, there's a liability issue there.
Well, the town, if it's a walking trail, the town would be.
Yeah, right. But if you're talking about just a recreation area, something,
I mean, I guess if you're talking swings or toys or
Yeah.
a fire pit,
Yeah.
there may be some liability with that.
Yeah, these are more just natural open space doors, kind of,
Park.
Yeah, trying to look at your open spaces and get them more connected is all that's talking about. All right, anything else? Yep.
I have a question back on an earlier item. Should we add any wording relative to the motion I made that we approve relative to the item that we removed the language it implied a registered professional landscape architect? Did we need to add a rationale for that because of the size of the lot and the fact that?
Oh, there was a law. for
I
that.
think we have some of that language in the zoning, in the municipal code,
Well, we need to add
about
any
buildings less than
clarification for the record.
5,000 square feet.
5,000, yeah. I think the way you had it is fine.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not like it's there, like Noah said, the ordinance itself talks about 5,000, I think it is 5,000 square feet or less.
We
It
need to
doesn't-
clarify and point that out, that was the,
I don't
for the
think
record,
so.
that's why we did that. Yeah.
I don't,
Reflect it in the minutes.
I can, yeah, I can.
That
address
can't
it
hurt.
in minutes.
Can't hurt to include it in there.
Yeah,
Similar to
yeah.
the other rationale we provided on the variance.
Yeah, that's fine, I can do
okay.
that.
So the November 16th, 2017 meeting of the Farragut Municipal Planning Commission is adjourned.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Safe one, if you're going,
Balls.
wherever we're going.
14 half-point underdogs.
It reminds me of a sign I saw the other day outside of church
I
that
don't know.
said,
It's going to be a mess.
"Go Vols." Thank God for basketball.